The richest country on earth, and roughly half the people in it cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. But it's not a moral failing, it's a math problem, and the math has been getting worse for a long time. Before we talk about anything you can do, I want to say one thing and one thing clearly. The structural and societal problems are real, and they are not your fault. Wages for hourly workers have not kept up with the cost of living for decades. Housing in the cities where most jobs are concentrated have risen so quickly that even people with college degrees and good jobs are housing insecure. Stack on top of that, student loans, childcare, and being one health crisis away from a serious financial emergency. For a growing number of Americans across all income levels, the numbers do not stack up no matter what they do. I'm sure you've heard a version of the discipline lecture before. Cut the coffee. Stop eating out. Track your spending. If any of that had solved it, you would not be watching this. So let's skip that lecture and talk about what's actually happening. There's a body of research, peer-reviewed, serious science, on what financial stress does to the human brain. And it is more uncomfortable than most people realize. A Harvard economist named Senthil Mullainathan and a Princeton psychologist named Eldar Shafir spent years studying the cognitive effects of scarcity. Not permanent poverty, not a personality type. Just the ongoing experience of not having enough. Their finding? That experience reduces cognitive capacity more than going an entire night without sleep. Think about that. It's not that people under financial stress are less capable. It's that the experience of financial stress makes anyone less capable. Measurably, demonstrably less capable. The mental bandwidth you would normally use for planning, problem solving, and thinking ahead gets consumed by the constant low-level cognitive work of managing scarcity. How much is left in the account? Whether that bill timing works. Which thing is best to push off paying till next week so you can eat? This is exhausting mental work, and it runs in the background all the time, taking up space that should be available for other things. What's left is what researchers call tunneling. The brain narrows its focus to the immediate problem and loses sight of the wider picture. You have to solve the crisis in front of you. And it becomes much harder to even see the move that would prevent the next crisis. The neuroscience matches this. Chronic stress impairs the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term reasoning. And it increases reliance on older, more reactive brain structures, those governing habit and impulse rather than strategy. The person who most needs to be making clear-headed, long-term decisions is the person whose brain is, in the moment, least equipped to make them. It's not a character flaw. That is human biology responding to sustained stress in exactly the way it has evolved to respond. The brain's not broken, it's doing its job. And its job in that environment is immediate survival, not making a 5-year plan. So when the cognitive load is this heavy and the emotional weight this constant, the brain looks for relief. The problem is that some of the release valves that people reach for do not solve the underlying source of the stress. They just reduce the feeling of stress without touching the root cause. And some of them, quietly over time, drain the exact two things that a person needs most to change their situation: time and productive capacity. I'm not going to name these stress release valves. You already know what yours are. What I will name is the mechanism: relief that does not resolve, with costs, serious costs that compound quietly in the background. So what actually helps? And I want to be honest here, because most of what gets offered as advice for this situation is way too thin to deal with the actual circumstances. Cutting expenses is real, and it's worth it to do if there's anything left to cut. But some people watching this have already cut everything to the bone, and there's still nothing left. If that's you, the expenses conversation is the wrong conversation. Now, creative housing arrangements, multi-generational living, housing shares, splitting costs with other people in similar situations are underrated as options. Housing is one of the largest expenses in most budgets. It's not glamorous, but it is actually workable for some people, at least until you can get out from under that constant, day-to-day, unrelenting pressure. Allow your brain to recover from the effects of living in scarcity, so you have the mental resources to plan your next move. The next move, increasing income, is the biggest lever and one of the hardest to pull. A better paying job is hard to get. Getting more education is expensive and takes time that most people living to paycheck just don't have. But both of those things, a better job, more education, are worth pursuing. Not as a total immediate transformation, that's just not realistic, but as a direction. One application, one conversation, one skill that takes 12 minutes a day to build. James Clear writes about this in Atomic Habits. The smallest action that you can actually take right now is more valuable than a perfect plan you never start. The smallest real move beats the best, most optimal imagined move every time. The system is genuinely hard right now. The math is genuinely unfavorable for a lot of people. And your brain is responding to that difficulty in exactly the way that human brains respond to sustained stress. Narrowing focus, seeking relief, burning bandwidth on surviving instead of planning. Understanding that is not an excuse, but it is like a map. A map does not make the terrain easier, but it does help you to navigate it with something more than just willpower and hope. Hey, you are already doing hard things. You have been doing them. The evidence that you can handle difficulty is the fact that you are still here, still managing, still looking for a way through. That is not nothing. That is actually everything that you need to build on.